Hello, everybody. Welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well. And today we're doing a box office preview for this upcoming weekend, which sees the brand new film Blue Beetle finally open up at the box office. And according to Tony, Blue Beetle has a ticket to ride past Barbie. Could we finally see the Barbie film be dethroned from the #1 spot going into now its 4th or 5th week of release? It is definitely possible. However, to try to say that this is somehow a great sign or a great weekend for Blue Beetle is definitely being a bit disingenuous when you look at how much the film actually cost and where this opening will match up to other DCEU films that opened up this year, both of which, talking here about Shazam 2 and The Flash, ended up being massive box office flops. The Flash being a much bigger flop than Shazam 2, but let's just be honest, they are both still flops nonetheless. We can expect the same thing at this point to happen with Blue Beetle unless something radically changes, but according to Deadline's box office projections and even Box Office Pros, it's not looking good. Before we go any further, please make sure you smash that like button, loud that fire button, honestly smash the rumble button as well. And also make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you know every time a video or live stream goes live on the channel. So Blue Beetle, I got my ticket to go see this thing tonight. Thanks, Gary. So we'll see how good or bad it actually is. But when it comes to the box office, it's just not looking good. It goes on to say, in what is poised to be the case of Warner Brothers beating itself for the #1 spot at the box office this coming weekend, the studio's new DC superhero title Blue Beetle is poised to halt Barbie's 3-weekend streak with a $28 to $32 million opening. Barbie, meanwhile, is looking to get $22 to $24 million for a 30% drop. So that is going to be very impressive for Barbie. As we all know, Barbie has had very strong holds every single week, and this film is still legging out. It's already made quite a bit of money, getting close to $1.2 billion. We're looking at this film getting probably to 1.3, if not beyond, this weekend. And I honestly think that somewhere between that $1.4, $1.6 billion range seems very likely at this point in time. Could be even more, but we'll have to wait and see what actually happens. But the big news, of course, is going to be with Blue Beetle. So as you can see right now, according to box office experts, they are projecting it to be around $28 to $32 million. What's interesting is, as we all know, Box Office Pro, when they do their projections, they typically over-project, right? They typically will, go towards the higher end, or their numbers will be somewhat higher, versus industry standards. On the, usually we also know that Box Office Pro, before, right, any of the actual numbers started coming in, and we started to see people like Deadline and Variety and others start to, adjust their numbers up for Barbie's opening weekend. They were the only ones to really get that right. They were the only ones to have it being projected in that $150 million domestic range. What's interesting then is if you have the so-called experts saying $28 to $32 million for Blue Beetle, hey, guess what? They say $26 million. So this is interesting because in this scenario, Box Office Pro is not having as much confidence or as much hope in the prospects of this movie. Remember that they use a very different metric. They obviously are tracking similar things like, pre-sales and general, sentiment, but they're also tracking social media tracking and also just other standards like that, and also comparing it to other films historically. And what's interesting is that they are, again, under projecting in this regard, right? To this movie. So it's always fascinating to see Box Office Pro's takes on things because, again, they usually tend to be well over the projections. But the fact that they are saying this film's not going to do as well as even what the industry is saying is something to behold. Now, if we actually go up to their full breakdown here, their range for the movie is between $22 and $32 million. So again, box office so-called experts say 28 to 32. For them, they go down. So they say it could make less than that. They say the minimum could actually be closer to $22 million. Now, one of the reasons why is because the early tracking for this movie was not very good. It was very, very low. This film has been seen as a likely flop for many months now, and apparently because of the success of Barbenheimer and the success of other movies, or at least the perceived success of other films, now you start to see a lot of these other films get a little bit of a higher tracking versus, and again, it was a lower number, and so it makes sense for them to, the closer you get to the release date, get a little bit of an uptick. But really, it comes down to a couple of things, and really one main thing actually, and that is, according to Deadline, and it's interesting how when it comes to stereotyping in general, people like Tony would definitely call you out as being an Islamophobe, but when he does it, I guess it's totally fine, because he says right here, the Angel Manuel Soto directed Blue Beetle is over-indexing with Latino and Hispanic audiences, hence the hope is there will be plenty of walk-up business. Now, what does walk-up business means? As you all know, I did work at a theater for several years, and one of the things that I noticed is that even though a lot of people are pre-buying tickets these days more than ever before in history, most people, and I think that this is still true to a large extent, most people will still buy their tickets on the day. So most people will walk up to the actual box office and buy them on the day. They will not have it pre-bought. They will not do anything like that. Now, why would also someone be walking up on the day to actually pay for their tickets? Because how do you pay for a ticket in general online? You have to have a credit card. You have to have a debit card, right? Guess what? Walking up to the box office, you can pay with cash. So I do find it a little bit interesting that he seems to be insinuating, why would it be that Hispanic audiences are paying with cash, it seems, Tony? Again, it's interesting how he's pointing that out, and everything is fine, but if someone like I was to point that out, oh, you must be an ist or a phobe, and you're stereotyping, and it's like, bruh, y'all are doing it just as much in this way. But also, it is insinuating that, hey, just because of the fact that there is a Hispanic lead in this movie, that it is directed by a Hispanic director, that somehow, some way, that means people are going to show up. If we all know anything, it's certain audiences do not like being pandered to, right? Some audiences are a little bit more susceptible to that and are a little bit more aware that they are being pandered to in this way. And I would not be surprised if this is going to be one of those examples. Now, again, that seems to be what Box Office Pro, at the very least, is picking up upon, or they are not nearly thinking that the walk-up business is going to be as powerful and as palpable as what Deadline is thinking with the other so-called industry experts. Now, what does this mean, right? $26 million opening weekend. Well, we'll go ahead and compare this to the opening weekends for other films. One film actually has a very similar budget. The other cost a lot more. So when it comes to Shazam 2, Fury of the Gods, what did that film open up to? $30 million. Oh boy. Now, hopefully you start to see why trying to act as if this is a huge win because it's dethroning Barbie. Barbie after 4 weeks of release, by the way. Okay, that's not really that impressive of an actual feat. But Shazam made $30 million, and that was just this year. The Flash, which cost a lot more than both of these movies, only made $55 million. So the fact that this movie, in a best case scenario, is expected to make around, $28 to $32 million, so the high end is 32. Box Office Pro says the average instead would be around $26 million. That means that this film is expected to come in underneath Shazam 2. And in a best case scenario, it only makes a couple of $1 million more than Shazam 2. That's still a far cry from the $55 million domestic made by The Flash. It also, again, we have to keep into account that a movie like The Flash was supposed to have a much larger, a much larger mark, right? It was supposed to be a much more internationally recognized title, and yet that film only made around $108 million or so. $160 million internationally, whereas Shazam 2 only made 74. So if we see this movie get a slower start than both Shazam and The Flash. And don't worry, we will be tracking the international release, the worldwide box office, because that to me is going to be an interesting comparison is, does the film come underneath those worldwide numbers? And it seems to make sense that it would, because remember, The Flash, that's a pretty well-known entity, right? That character has existed in previous movies in the DCEU. Shazam, this is the second film in that Shazam franchise, right? And again, a slightly more well-known character. Blue Beetle, I have no idea anything about Blue Beetle. I'm not a comics person, and so for me, it's a brand new entity, and so those are not always going to be guaranteed hits, right? Unless you have something like a Guardians of the Galaxy, right, which was able to not only have a opening weekend that was at least a solid starting point, but it was because of the word of mouth on that movie that it became the success that it was, right? It wasn't because a lot of people were like, ooh, I'm gonna go see this in opening weekend. I'm like, I know, River, I know. She is so sick and tired of these people and the fact that the lies that they will come up with, especially Tony over at Deadline. If you were following me yesterday on social media, Tony has a lot to say about Sound of Freedom, continuing to perpetuate the lies about the whole QAnon adjacent nonsense, but I digress. Sound of Freedom doing incredibly well, doing massive bank, making more than Dial of Destiny, so shout out to them for beating out Disney, the company that at one point had the rights to that movie. Hey, screw you, Disney. But Deadline, as you can see, do you think Deadline's going to be correct? Do you think that the industry so-called experts are going to be correct? That the film is going to be able to open up to $28 to $32 million, that it will end up beating Barbie? Or are you kind of more on the line of where Box Office Pro is? For me personally, based on the fact that there seems to be very little interest in this movie, based on what I've seen on social media, I am thinking closer to that 26 million, maybe even to that lower end of 22. And if it gets that lower end, right? If it gets that low end of $22 million, you have the potential for Barbie to come in at the number one spot 4 weeks in a row. Now, again, it's a lot harder the further that it gets out because obviously more and more people have seen it. There's less and less people available to go watch the movie over a period of time, but it will be interesting to see where that movie ends up falling. And so will we see Barbie finally lose to Blue Beetle? Right now, I would say it's a toss-up. Again, it really depends on if the walk-up numbers are as big as the so-called experts are saying, or if it might be a little bit more of a normal showing and it gets closer to this $26 million. Again, if it ends up falling closer to that $22 million minimum that Box Office Pro has, oh boy, it's already going to be bad enough trouble as it is if it comes into $26 million, as that's $4 million less than where Shazam 2 was. And again, Shazam this is a much more well-known entity, only made $132 million worldwide. The Flash, a much more well-known entity, made $268. I don't think it's going to end very well for this movie. $120 million budget for Blue Beetle. It needs to make quite a bit to break even, and I just do not see that happening. So right now, even though they're saying it's so good and oh man, it's over-indexing with certain audiences, yeah, I'm seeing another flop here, ladies and gentlemen. But let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. There's also another film called Strays coming out, a rated R film with dogs. I love dogs, but the whole rated R talking stuff, I'm over it. It's silly. But you also do have this film projected to beat out Oppenheimer. I would not be surprised if Oppenheimer ends up beating Strays, but again, it's so close that it could go either way there. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button. Not at the bottom of the audio, smash the rumble button as well. Also, blessed feast of Saint Hyacinth. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a special shout out to all of my members at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, starting off first with my members over on Patreon: Father Luca Illich, Hymir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, check out his YouTube channel by the same name, Laura, the Monomator General's Story, Rosetta Allen, check out her YouTube channel, Eagle Rider, and Miss Martin Muses, check out her YouTube channel by the same name as well. To my subscribe star peeps, Zion Voders, Matt317, check out his Twitch channel by the same name, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK Man, who you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my locals members, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. So thank y'all very much for being my supporters at the Keep of the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shouted out at the end of every live stream and video, go ahead and check out that top link in the video description below to find out ways to sign up to support the channel and to be able to get access to things like the shoutouts, but also to giveaways. I have an exclusive giveaways channel on my Discord server where I give away 4Ks, Blu-rays, all kinds of stuff, and also access to an exclusive podcast that I do once or twice a month, depending on what I'm able to get accomplished, especially over the course of this crazy, crazy busy summer. You guys are all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.